All right, well, welcome everybody. We get on chapter 18 here today, the fall of Babylon. Again, we're going to walk through it, and hopefully, I think tonight we should be able to get through it pretty easy. Maybe even get you out a little bit early since I had you here so long last week. Now, I say that, but you know how these things go. Let's start here in chapter 18, beginning at verse 1, and I'm going to read through verse 3, and then we will pause there. After this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven. He had great authority, and the earth was illuminated by his splendor. With a mighty voice he shouted, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great! She has become a home for demons and a haunt for every evil spirit, a haunt for every unclean and detestable bird. For all the nations have drunk the maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries." I'm just going to pause right there. So as we review a little bit, last chapter, chapter 17, we're in a 3-chapter interlude between the final plagues and the final judgments. So 17, 18, and 19 kind of give us a little bit of a pause here in between those two events. We see the great prostitute is revealed in all of her splendor and all the earth's finest trinkets and gold, and we talked about how that is kind of a mockery of the holy city that we see later on, where she is just wearing them on the outside as jewelry, and we see the holy city as part of the foundation. It's not dressed in pearls. The gates are pearls. You know, that's this beautiful, beautiful city that God's prepared, and how everything, the great prostitute, the beast, and the unholy trinity we've been talking about, it's all a mockery of God. And she is drunk on the blood of the saints. And you see the beast turns on her and brings her to ruin. Remember, she is sitting on the beast. She's not controlling the beast. She's in partnership with it. She's sitting on it, but she's not controlling it. And so at the end, it turns on her and brings her to ruin. And we also see that it represents Rome and Roman culture. And all the kings and the horns and all the heads all represents that Roman culture that was persecuting the first century church. So we jump in here in chapter 18, and the scene shifts. Well, it's like a tongue twister tonight. And another angel appears from heaven. Now remember, John in the last chapter was kind of pulled aside, and instead of just a spectator, the angel says, "Hey, I want to show you something," and then he explained it all to him. Now John looks, and we're kind of back to that old way of doing things. John's still in this same vision here, but he sees now another angel coming down from heaven. This one is not as a guide like the previous angel that pulled him in. This one is strictly an announcer. And we see the words "from heaven." You can read that as from God's presence. All right, if something comes down from heaven, that's just kind of the way they're saying it here. Rather poetic, but John has some poetic license to use. And we see that he has great authority. Now, the word here, great, is the same word that's used to describe the great prostitute. There's what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, there's a comparison here, right? He has the power to declare her destruction. We can't do it, right? I'm not great. I'm an individual. I on my own can't bring down the great prostitute, right? The individual Christian could not bring down the empire. But with God, all things are possible. And so we had this great prostitute, and the world holds her up and says, "Look how great the prostitute is. Wow, look how beautiful she is." And yet we have this angel with great authority. Not just great decorations, not a great costume, but great authority. Remember the story of Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Surrounded by the enemy. And they get together, every man, woman, and child come together in front of the temple, and they fast and they pray, and they stand in the Lord's presence. And the king gets up and says, "Lord, we have no power to face this vast army that is attacking us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." Right? The king says, "I don't have any power over the enemy, Lord, but you do. And so we're going to trust in you. We're going to wait on you. Here, kind of on that same vein, you and I, we're facing overwhelming odds out there, a great enemy. Let's not underestimate the power of the enemy. That's when we get into trouble. Now, don't get me wrong. He's already lost the war, right? The victory's already won through Jesus Christ. You and I have authority through Jesus Christ. But we still don't need to underestimate our enemy. I think y'all might remember last week I mentioned the show, When Animals Attack. You guys remember that? Right? And I talked about the girl that was in the shampoo commercial. Okay, and the lion turns on her. Why? Because he's a lion. You underestimated what the lion could do, and when the lion decided it was going to be a lion again, bad things happen. How many times have we seen nations go into war not fully prepared to fight the war, and then they realize when it's too late? We underestimated these guys. A good example of that is Russia. Someone tries to have a land war in Russia. What does Russia do? Every time, let's fall back and wait for winter. We'll freeze them out. It works every time, right? Because people underestimate the power of the enemy. The Nazis thought, oh, we rolled through Poland, we rolled through France, we rolled through all these other countries in days. Russia's going to fall in no time. Several years later, they were still fighting in the same city. Right? You can't underestimate the enemy. But when we get to that point, we can say, Lord, I don't know what to do, but my eyes are watching you. And then it talks about the angel's splendor. This is the splendor from being in God's presence. You can tell when someone has spent time in the presence of God. There's just that sense in your heart, right? As deep calls to deep. You can tell when you're talking to someone. You get that little tug. Like, this is a brother. This is a sister. Never met this person before, but I got a pretty good feeling we're on the same page. The same is true being in the presence of God. Think back to Moses when he came off the mountain. He had this holy radiance about him. It terrified the people. They couldn't stand to look at him because he had with him the glow of God. And so they had to put a bag over his head to hide the glory. So this angel comes from God's presence to make this announcement, and he is just absolutely radiant. It's no wonder why the shepherds trembled when they saw the heavens burst forth and the angels proclaimed Jesus' birth. It's no wonder that the Roman soldiers at the tomb shook and became like dead men. They were literally scared to death. They passed out from fear. Why? Because in the presence of a holy God, they were undone. And so we see this splendor radiating. And it reminded me of John chapter 1, verses 4 through 5. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Here is a world that has been dominated by darkness. The prostitute and all of her minions, the beast and all of his minions, they love the dark because you can hide things in the dark. But when Jesus came, that light of glory shone into the world. And once that light started to illumine things, that's when people got uncomfortable. Like roaches on the kitchen floor when you turn the light on. They scatter. They don't like the light. The same is true here. Evil deeds love to be done in dark. But now Jesus has come and the glory of this angel shows, and it illuminates the whole earth. As dark as the earth is, in this moment, the whole earth is illuminated. That is the power of God. Darkness cannot overcome the light. And this goes back to Ezekiel chapter 43. I want to read this to you here. This is verses 1 through 9 of Ezekiel 43. And this is from his vision. He said, Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of God and of Israel coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and the visions I had seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. While the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. He said, Son of man, This is the place of my throne and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. The people of Israel will never again defile my holy name, neither they nor their kings, by their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death. When they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them, they defiled my holy name by their detestable practices. So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I will live among them forever. Right, in that vision, God is speaking to Ezekiel, and he says, what? They have prostituted themselves by making these false idols, by worshiping these pagan gods, right next door to where I'm supposed to be. He said, this is my house, and I'm not going to share it with anyone else. And he said, so I destroyed them. I warned them. They did it anyway. Destruction came. Why? Because they had prostituted themselves. Here we see this fight, right? This battle, if you will, between light and dark. This great prostitute riding the beast. And now a single angel coming down. Why? Because the world had prostituted itself. They'd sold themselves. You know, they sold their soul to the devil, right? For what? For personal gain. And now they're reaping the consequences of that. In fact, in this chapter, there are many, many references to Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. I'm not going to go through and pick them all out, but as we go through, if you look back in your Bibles, you're going to see a lot of notes and a lot of little letters. If it's like mine, there's little reference letters, superscript up in the corners at the end of verses. And it ties in with so much Scripture, so many verses. It's one thing I love about Scripture. It's all connected. And so then the angel speaks with a mighty voice. He doesn't just speak, he shouts. Now when you shout, you don't just shout because, well, I guess my kids do. They just shout for shouting's sake, right? But usually you shout to get someone's attention and so everybody can hear you. You raise your voice so the entire audience can hear. And that's the purpose. It's meant to be heard by everyone. This is a global announcement, right? That's like when the captain gets on. This is your captain speaking. It's a message for everybody. And you don't have any doubt who made the announcement or where the amount. You know it came from the cockpit. The one in charge, he's going to tell everybody what you can and can't do. Kind of what we're seeing here. And so he begins reading out or proclaiming the chapter. I'm going to unravel my tongue here eventually tonight. He's going to read the charges against her. Now, we just went through July 4th. Look at the Declaration of Independence. Here's what we believe. Here's all the reasons why we're filing this document against the king. Here's all the charges we're bringing against him. And that's why we feel that this time is necessary to separate ourselves from England. Right? We had to take a list of charges. This is why. It's not just arbitrary. It's not just God's a meanie and he wants to smite somebody and she's not playing by his rules. No, there's legitimate cause for God's retribution here. And so he reads these charges against her. And you'll notice it's in the past tense. Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Now, Rome didn't fall for another 350 years after this was written. Rome actually thrived for a while after this. And so for the first century believer who was looking at this going, well, that's great, but when's this going to happen? 350 years ago, we were still England. 350 years ago, there may have been some rumblings of independence, but we were still just paying our taxes and being good colonists. 350 years is a long time. 350 years in my family is 9 generations. So think about that. 9 generations pass before Rome finally falls, maybe more. And yet God made this promise in the past tense because God had already declared its destruction was going to happen. And when God says it, it's as good as done. God says Rome has fallen. Well, Rome's still here. Well, I've already proclaimed it's going to fall. It's just a matter of time. Rome has fallen. They don't know it yet. But there it goes. I'm reminded again of Daniel chapter 11. Right? The end will still come at the appointed time. People are going about their business. They're doing their thing. They're ruling. They're reigning. They're being holy terrors. And yet the end will still come at the appointed time. There's nothing they can do to stop it. Look at what Jesus said about the flood. He said people were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage up to the time when the first raindrop started to fall. Then they got serious, but by then it was too late. They paid no heed to the warnings. And when the time came, it was too late. Why? Because God had already decided in his heart this is what he was going to do. It was as good as done before Noah started swinging the first hammer strike. And so he makes this claim, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, again in the past tense. Matthew Henry stated that some have thought a double fall is hereby intended. First, her apostasy, and then her ruin. In other words, the second fall of judgment was brought on by her first willful turn, her first willful falling away from God. So because she chose to ignore God and turn away from him, that first fall now leads to this second fall. It makes sense, but I don't know if I agree with him wholeheartedly on that. But I think we need to be careful. We also need to look at this and say, Lord, I want to make sure that I don't do anything in my life that would cause me to fall away from you. I want to be so close to you that people can't look at me and see where you begin and I end. That's how close to God we need to be. But here, I think, I agree a little bit with what he's saying. If we're not careful in that first step in the wrong direction, that's a slippery slope. And it's not long before you're so far gone you don't know how to get back. Isaiah 21 verse 9. I want to read that to you here. It says, look, here comes a man in a chariot with a team of horses, and he gives back the answer. Babylon has fallen, has fallen. All the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground. Remember, what God said, this has already happened. Babylon has fallen. It's already over for them. They may not realize it yet, but it's already over for them. In Isaiah 21, verse 9, all the images of its gods lie shattered on the ground. That was the problem. You turned your back on the one living God. Remember what Paul said in Romans chapter 1. Instead, you were content to worship images of mortal man and created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. Last week we read Jeremiah chapter 51, a large section of that. I'm not going to go through and read it again, but go back and look at that again. It's the same cry. It's the same problems. Compromise, idolatry, turning your back on God's promises. It's fallen and smashed, and it begets wailing. It's the same thing we see here with Babylon. And then he goes farther, and he gives us the reason for this claim that she has fallen. What's the reason why God is proclaiming this? She has become a home for demons. And again, like last time we talked about the great prostitute, or 2 weeks ago, or it was last week, the mother of prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. You don't just get a title like that assigned to you. You have to earn that title. If I want to become a doctor, I either have to get my PhD or my medical license, right? I can't just walk into a hospital and say, hey, I want to be a doctor. Oh, okay, well, here you go. Here's the stethoscope. Go knock yourself out, right? You have to earn it. You got to work hard to get these titles. Okay, here, she's become a home for demons. Well, that goes along with the title that she wore on her forehead, Mother of Abominations of the Earth. Now, I know we in the Wesleyan Church don't talk nearly enough about this. There's a fine line. I think C.S. Lewis talked about this. And if you've never read C.S. Lewis, I would recommend you take some time to read C.S. Lewis, an incredible thinker. This was a man who was dare I say, a devout atheist. And he found Christ. And the works that poured out of this man, he was one of the greatest Christian authors of the last century. He talked about people and their fascination with the spiritual realm. He said they're either completely disinterested in it to the point where they're in danger of being lost because they don't know that the enemy's out there, or they're super fascinated in it and they put too much stock into it and it consumes them. There's a fine line we need to walk here. Right? We are at war spiritually with the demonic realm. Satan is at work in this world. And again, like I said earlier, we don't need to discount him and pretend that he doesn't exist. When we deny the presence of the enemy, that's when we set ourselves up to fail. Remember what Daniel said again in chapter 11. He will seize the kingdom through intrigue when its people feel secure. Right? When they're apathetic. We don't have to worry about the enemy. You guys remember the Trojan horse? But you can't get this through your gate. Well, hold my mead. Here we come, right? People thought, well, they're going to show him. They got too proud and too haughty. Well, pride goeth before the fall, and a haughty heart before destruction. We have to be careful. She has become a home for demons. Again, Isaiah chapter 21, idols and false gods. She is a harbor of evil in the world. If you could figure out where the yellow jacket's nest is, that's the source of all the bad in the world, right? Anybody ever been stung by a yellow jacket or run across them with a lawnmower or something? You know it, right? You know all the pain in your life comes from that one little hole in the ground. I'm still convinced there are some things that God made after the fall of mankind. After he kicked him out of Eden, he's like, you know what? I got a few more things I want to give you. Yellow jackets and poison ivy. I think those are two of those things. Because yellow jackets are butt heads with wings. There's no other purpose in this world other than to be jerks. That's it. That's their whole purpose in life. When you find that little hole in the ground, you know that's the problem, right? That's the source of the problem. Well, that is Babylon, right? She has become the source, harboring all the bad. It's not the hole in the ground that's the problem. It's the stuff that's inside of it, right? Well, what's inside of her is all the problems, all these demons, all this evil that has consumed her. And it says that she is a haunt for unclean spirits and all kinds of detestable birds. Now this one I had to do some extra reading around to try and figure out what that means. Because the word haunt, I think in this context, as a location versus a physical action, right? If you have a ghost that's haunting you, it's like Casper the Friendly Ghost. You guys remember him? Right, there's a physical haunting, and I think it speaks to that aspect a little bit, but I also think it's that location. We're hanging around the old haunt, you know. We used to haunt that place over there. The word is literally a prison. Okay, it's a prison for unclean spirits, and a prison, like a cage. Think about it like the caged birds, for all kinds of detestable birds. Why do you cage birds? Because they're your pets, right? You cage birds because they're useful to you, either for entertainment or like pigeons, they have a role to play. Matthew Henry, let's start here. Wesleyan Bible Commentary kind of defined this as a place where they're undisturbed, right? I don't go to the jail and bother the prisoners. I don't go to the prison and pick on the prisoners, right? They're in prison. They're there for a reason, right? They're in prison, but they don't have to worry about us coming in to bother them. There's some security there. They're undisturbed. They have their own set of rules. They have their own set of guidelines. They have their own culture. It's its own place. Matthew Henry The way he kind of describes this is think like a haunted house. What does every picture of a haunted house have? Unclean spirits, right? And scary birds. They're always hanging around. You don't believe me? Watch the first 5 seconds of Scooby-Doo. What's the two things that come by? The ghost comes by. Crow screams and flies, right? Okay? When you think of old haunted houses, there's ghosts and there's detestable birds, scary birds. There's a reason why we think about those things together. And I think here, I see both sides of this, both the Wesleyan Bible commentary and Matthew Henry's commentary. I think it's a place where these things feel secure. But I think it's also just kind of a place where they hang out, and it's kind of it's like a ghost story here. That's the picture I think that God is trying to paint through John. Here was this great prostitute. She was gilded and baubled and had all kinds of ornamentation on her. And now her description is she's full of ghosts and scary birds. She's a haunted house. Kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it? Everybody wants the mansion. Nobody wants the haunted house. Right? The mansion, boy, I could make a life in a mansion. But a haunted house, that's kind of a morbid attraction, right? It's just entertainment. Well, I think the great prostitute thought very highly of herself when she was sitting on the beast. But what is a prostitute at the end of the day? Entertainment. The angel here is calling out the truth. And then he presents the evidence. Here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. And again, this is important. Remember the Declaration of Independence. It wasn't just, well, we think the king's a stupid head. We don't like him. Well, here's why. More than just he charges taxes, he's usurped the authority of God. He thinks he's more important than what he is. He's not representing us freely. He's taken our rights and our privileges as Englishmen. Right? Here's all the evidence that we have to support our decision to separate. The same is true here. Here's the evidence. And it's a review of chapter 17. It describes very clearly what we just read in chapter 17. Here's what we know to be true about the great prostitute. He names all those things off. The nations drunk her maddening wine of her adulteries. The kings of the earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of the earth were rich from her excessive luxuries. Right? The kings got drunk on her power and her authority. Don't get me wrong, sin feels good. If it didn't feel good, nobody would want to sin. I mean, if every time I went to sin, someone kicked me in the stomach, I'd stop doing it. God, it's not worth it. But it feels good in the moment. And remember, last week we kind of talked about getting drunk. The phrase that, as Noah Webster described, is this worked into a frenzy. It's kind of a mob mentality. They were worked up into a frenzy where they couldn't think straight. Guys, I know we have all been there. We see a pretty lady and our brains quit working. Ladies, you've seen guys do this too, right? What on earth was he thinking? He wasn't. I can promise you that. They worked themselves up to a frenzy. It felt good in the moment. She gave them something they wanted. Even if it was only temporary, boy, it felt good in the moment, and that's what they were charging in with. They're like, yes, let's just keep going. Everyone else is doing it. And they got into bed with her. They sold themselves, as we read in Ezekiel, they prostituted themselves. For what? For momentary pleasures. It says the merchants grew rich from her excessive luxuries. Now, I want to focus here is on the excess, on the self-indulgence. I've heard the phrase, in fact, even as I was reading through the commentaries, I think it was the Wesleyan Bible commentary, the commentator mentioned that he had heard someone pray one time, Lord, you keep them humble and we'll keep them poor, when praying for the pastor. Because there's this idea that if I have wealth, therefore I must be evil. right? Oh, shame on you for having too much money, right? Take Elon Musk, right? The first trillionaire in world history. Well, he could just give all his money to everyone else. Why? Did they work for it? Did they put any time and energy and effort or brain power into? No, it's free money, and what comes easy goes easy, right? You look at mega churches. Oh, well, they must be less spiritual. Right? They got to compromise somewhere, and sometimes that's true, yeah, but there's a lot of compromise in small churches too. Or if the pastor is wealthy, well, how could he take a vacation to Tahiti? He could have spent some of that money and stayed on. There's this old legalistic idea that if I have money, therefore I should give it all away and I just need to be poor my whole life. I can't enjoy any luxuries in life. God gives that gift of luxury and wealth to some people, and to others, I don't know why, right? You guys remember Fiddler on the Roof? If I were a rich man. Okay. God, why can't I be just a little bit rich? I ask the same question sometimes. Just a little bit rich, you know? Why not me? Why someone else? I don't know. It's God's prerogative, not mine. Having wealth is not bad. It comes with its own set of challenges. And I can tell you, my faith was stronger when I had nothing, because I had to rely on Him for everything. Which is why Jesus said it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a wealthy man to get to heaven. Because when you're comfortable, you're apathetic, because you can provide for your own needs. So I think we have such a problem in America with people who are so comfortable seeing a need for God. I have everything I need. What do I need God for? Because we're comfortable. And yet in the places where persecution is the strongest, the church is growing the fastest. Here the focus is not on the luxury items, but on the excess luxury. More than what you need. Is my lazy boy luxurious? Oh, it is broken in and wonderful, and I love it, right? Could I be just as seated in a wooden chair? Yes, absolutely. Or a folding metal chair for $20 at Costco? Yeah, that would work too. Man, I sure do enjoy that luxury chair, right? Am I glad that my truck has heated seats? Absolutely. Not because my butt gets cold, but because it soothes my back muscles now. Does that mean I'm a bad person because I spent extra money for a truck that had a back heater? No. But when I go above and beyond in that pursuit of luxury, that pursuit of comfort becomes my main focus, then we run into the issue. And that's the issue with the merchants here. 1 Timothy 6:9 through 10. Those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. Now, I've heard it's quoted incorrectly. Money is the root of all evil. No, it's not what it says. It says the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Last week we talked about capitalism. I still think capitalism is a nifty idea. I think it's the right way to do it. I think if you want to work hard, you want to invest yourself and use your brains, I think that pays off. But I can't serve God and money. Capitalism, I think I put it in here, maybe I've already said it, if not, I'm going to say it now. Capitalism without morality is just greed. That's why so many young people have a problem with capitalism today, is they see greed, right? I can give free methadone to a crackhead, but I can't give EpiPens to people who have allergies. Why? Because if I can keep them hooked, I can keep them a customer. Right? That's why we have so rare of a cure and so many medicines. That's why an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Because if I can hook you, I've got you. There's no morality in that. The morality would say we need to work hard to make sure we provide enough medicine to heal people totally so they don't have to rely on us anymore. But we don't do that. Why? Because greed is what defines us at times. Without morality, we're lost. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus said that in Matthew 6:24. But that is what they're talking about here. These merchants, it's not that they have luxury items. It's that was their focus. That was their hunger. I need to get more and more and more and more. So then we jump in verse 4. After these charges have been read, now we have this next section. I'm going to begin reading here in verse 4. Then I heard another voice from heaven say, "Come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. For her sins are piled up to heaven, and God has remembered her crimes. Give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Mix her a double portion from her own cup. Give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. In her heart she boasts, I sit as a queen. I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore, in one day her plagues will overtake her. Death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her." We shift gears a little bit. There's another voice, again, from heaven. When something comes from heaven, it is from God. So this disembodied voice that John hears from heaven is the voice of God. And what is he doing? He's calling his people to come out of her. Now, this is one of the reasons why I tend to kind of break away from what many of us would consider the traditional view of the tribulation, where there's this great rapture and we're all taken out and we don't have any problems. Because here we are at the end of the book, and God is calling to my people. Why? Because they're still in Babylon. They're stuck there. And he says, "Come out, my people." I think this is still relevant. We can't just say, well, this is for those people, who they didn't get pulled out after chapter 4. They're still stuck. No, I think this is for us that overcome, endure, persevere to the end. I think this is one of those moments. In the midst of all this judgment, God says to his people, come out of her. Don't be a part of this anymore. This was a common prophetic warning. Pay attention. Come out of the city that's going to be destroyed. Remember what God said to Lot? Hey, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. You need to get out of town. Well, no. Leave. Abraham's up on the mountain. He's praying, God, what if there's like 5 people? What if there's one good man in the whole city? God's saying to Lot the whole time, hey, we're fixing to rain down sulfur from heaven. We're going to destroy this place. You need to get out before you're destroyed with it. He's saying there's still time to get clear. There's still hope. You might be in Babylon now, but this is the warning, get out. Okay, this is the tornado sirens. Tornado's coming. It's headed right for you. Don't be standing near windows, right? Find safety. And it's not where you are right now. We are called to be separate from the world. Now, there's a difference in living on the earth and living in the world. Now, we can live on the earth. This is home right now, physically. But it doesn't mean I'm in the world. Those are two completely different things. He says her sins are piled up to heaven. Again, that's a pretty big statement. It's hyperbole, right? But it's clear messaging. Her sins are piled to heaven. You can either think of this as like a stack of papers that are just stacked all the way up. You can just see, you can't see any because they're all the way up to heaven, right? The imagery that popped in my head here was just a big pile of poo. It's piled all the way to heaven. Because that's what it is, right? Our righteousness is filthy rags, it's dirty diapers to God. The best that we have to offer is filthy rags. He says, this is piled to heaven. And brother, let me tell you, sin stinks. It is offensive to the nostrils of God. Now contrast that with what it says about our prayers. They're mixed with the incense and put on the altar, right? The incense is a sweet aroma. But here, man, this stinks. Its sin is piled to heaven. And you could tell when someone's been around a pile of stuff, right? I remember as a kid, we grew up in West Virginia. We'd be around some of the Mennonites, some of the Amish people sometimes. Sunday, Monday wasn't so bad. But after they've been slopping the hogs and it's Friday, and it's about 95 degrees in the summertime, you can tell, right? You're not going to fool God and say, oh, well, I wasn't really there. That wasn't me. No, I can smell it on you. You need to come out of that. Be done messing around in the mud like the prodigal son. Get out of the hog trough and come back home. That's what God is saying here. Even at the end of the book, after all that's been said and done, after all the people had ignored, God is still calling the people. Come out before the final destruction. There's one last plea. Please come home. It says God has remembered her crimes. Not that God forgot them, right? But all those prayers of all the saints and all the martyrs. How long, O Lord, will we have to wait? Back at the beginning, he said, you got to wait a little longer. A couple of chapters ago, we read the time for waiting is past. The time is now. And that's what we're seeing, all these plagues that are poured out now. We're coming into this final judgment. He is not slow to answer. He is patient. There's a difference. Someone that is slow, sometimes people are just slow. You ever met someone that always is, no matter what you tell them, they're always going to be late? I had a lady, I'm not looking at anybody, I had a lady at my first church, 15 minutes. She was 15 minutes late every time because she would start for the church on time. And between her kitchen and her door, she would find 15 things that she needed to do before she got out to the house. She got mad at me one time when I told her something started a half an hour early and she got there a few minutes before it started. It worked. I got her there on time. Some people are just late. And some people like that, they're busy. And I get that. And I respect that. Some people are late because they're selfish and they don't care about anybody else's time. I think sometimes when we're praying to God for something, and we're praying and nothing is happening, it feels like that sometimes. God, why are you not doing this? You said to ask whatever I want in your name and you'll do it. And I believe that you can, Lord, and I'm praying for this, but nothing has happened. Why? Sometimes it's because God is patient. And we don't see it, but there is a time and a reason why the answer is hold off. Now imagine being the first century church. You have been persecuted for 2 or 3 generations at this point. Many of these people have watched their families be ripped apart by wild animals, or crucified, or beaten, or beheaded, or whatever type of sick ways the Romans had invented to destroy people. Nero liked to dip them in tar and light them on fire and hang them around his garden to light his garden parties. The Romans were really good at neat ways to kill people. They were sadistic. That's one of the things we see here. That's why it says she was drunk on the blood of the saints. And all the kings of the world were drunk on her wine. They were all part of the same cup of destruction, even if they didn't recognize it. But God has remembered her crimes. The time to act is now. And we see an equal but opposite response. Give back to her as she has given, pay her back double for what she has done. And give her as much torture and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. Now that's the rules of science. For every action there's an equal but opposite reaction. Who do you think wrote those rules, by the way, those laws? Probably the lawgiver. And we see that reflected here. You're only going to pull that rubber band so far before it slings the other direction, right? She is reaping what she has sown. She has ignored all the alarms. She has ignored all the warning signs. She has ignored all the prophecies. In fact, she has laughed at them and slaughtered the prophets who brought them. She is reaping what she has sown. This is not judgment joyfully dispensed, but sovereignly so. One of the commentaries was talking about how, I don't know where they'd gotten this, I'd never heard this before, but that John's attitude here, some thought was rather unchristian, that he was saying, we need to repay her double for what she's done to us. Yeah. Hit her again, Lord, hit her again. I don't see that here. The carnal side of me understands that emotion, right? But I don't see that here. I think this is God dispensing his sovereign judgment, his divine retribution. Said, you've picked on my kids too long. Now I'm going to whoop you. And she boasts. She says, I sit as a queen. I'm not a widow, and I will never mourn. Even after all the destruction that's taken place, she's boasting. I am a queen. She's in denial. She's gotten so fat on all the goodness of the world that they've just poured out on her because they wanted something from her. She's in denial about who she really is. She was a means to the end. And yet she says, here, I am a queen. I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. I will never fall. It says, I am not a widow. She's saying, my men didn't die in war. You've heard of the Pax Romana, right? The 1,000 years of peace. For the people in Rome, maybe. People on the outside and all the soldiers who were fighting wars to keep Rome safe, not so much. But for Rome, they were largely at peace. They were aristocrats. They were artists. They were thinkers. Right? This was the Ivy League universities of its day. Men of ideals. You guys remember The Wizard of Oz? What you lack is a grain. You need a diploma, right? He gives them these little trinkets and they think rather highly of themselves. Kind of the same thing here, the Wizard of Oz scenario. We've been at peace for 1,000 years. Maybe not in England and France and Spain and Germany and, But here in Rome, we've had peace for 1,000 years. All we do is reap the benefits of all the other destruction we have wrought on the world. Pax Romana is a lie. It was only peaceful if you loved Rome. But she's boasting, my men didn't die in war. I'm not a widow. I don't have to worry about these things. I'm well taken care of. Everybody loves me. They like me. They really like me. Right? There's a false sense of security here. Now, we've all met people that have a false sense of security. When I would go hiking in the backcountry, I was prepared for just about anything. Whether I was going out for 3 days or I was going out for 3 miles, I carried the same backpack with me. Because that 3-hour trip, I've seen Gilligan's Island. A 3-hour tour, right? Every year when we lived in the Smoky Mountains, someone would get lost. There was one lady, she was lost for a few years. 25 yards from the trail, on the Appalachian Trail, they found her body inside of her sleeping bag in the tent. She'd gotten off the trail to use the bathroom. She'd gotten turned around, gotten in some thick brush, and never could find her way back to the trail, right? I'd be 3 and 4 miles back into the backcountry and see some dude in Crocs and shorts and a tank top, no water, nothing, just hoping for the best and going for a walk. I've also been 4 and 5 miles back on a road that was as wide as this aisle and seeing a single hog track in the middle of the aisle where that hog took 1 step here, 1 step there, and 1 step there. Probably 700-pound hog. Maybe not quite that big. He was a big boy. Right? It was this, his hoof print was the size of my hand. That's a big old hog. I was ready. I unhooked the 44 Magnum that day. I was like, nope, not today, buddy, right? Because I respected the enemy and I knew what he could do. And yet there's some people that walk around blissfully ignorant. You have no idea how much danger you're in. It's a conversation I'm going to have with my daughter when she gets old enough to be on her own in the world, right? Just because someone seems nice at first doesn't mean you can trust them. How you dress, how you protect yourself, how you present yourself, these are all things part of the conversation. I don't want you to have a false sense of security and think just because you're on a college campus and someone's nice to you, you can trust them. And unfortunately, ladies, that's the world we live in, right? Walk with your keys in between your fingers so you can, strike if you need to. Don't travel alone after dark. That's why ladies travel in packs to the bathroom, right? Because you never know what you're going to find, right? There's safety in numbers, okay? These are all conversations we have. Why? Because we live in a fallen world. And if we walk around blindly and unprepared, when something does happen, we're not ready for it. She has a false sense of security. And so the angel, or this voice here, proclaims the judgment. Right? Rome wasn't built in a day. You've heard that, right? My grandma used to say, Rome wasn't built in a day. In other words, let's get started right now, right? It's going to take a little time. But neither were her sins accumulated to heaven in a single day. Her destruction has been brewing. You see, God's already declared it 350 years before it fell. It's coming. She's just not aware of it. But in one day, she will be destroyed. The end will still come at the appointed time. All the pain, all the heartache, all the suffering, all the destruction she has wrought, it's going to be done. Her plagues will overtake her. Death, mourning, and famine. All the things that she celebrated not having. I will mourn no more. My men don't die in war. I am a queen. I have all that's provided for me. I will never go for want, right? And yet those things will be stripped away from her. Contrast that with her boasts. And this is reminiscent to me of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar stands on his balcony and says, look at all that I have built. Look at all that I have accomplished with my own two hands. As if ordering all the slave labor to achieve all those things didn't matter, right? Look at all that I have done. 6 weeks later, he's chewing grass, acting like a cow because he's gone mad. Led around on a leash. The man who achieved so much was now incapable of doing anything. And he says, she will be consumed by fire. It's God's judgment, right? He is mighty. The one who judges her is mighty. And it shows the permanence of it. If something is consumed by fire, it's not just burnt. It's gone. I'm roasting a marshmallow. I like mine toasted. I'm a marshmallow artist, right? When I roast my marshmallow, it's golden all the way around the outside and it's gooey on the inside. You know what Michael does? A torch. He loves it, right? It's consumed by fire. Sometimes you're cooking hot dogs on the grill, one of them drops down between the grates. That's your sacrifice unto the Lord, right? It gets burned up. It's consumed by fire. There's nothing left. Remember, I had a rug that someone gave to us, or some type of big rattan, I don't know what it was, straw-looking thing. And it started to rip and tear, and so my father-in-law took it outside. We put it on our little brick fire pit we had, and we just lit it on fire. It's going to burn it up. And it burned, and it burned, and it burned, and it burned. And I had the leaf blower. We were stoking that fire. It was like a torch, and it was so hot that literally the next morning I went out and my bricks had cracked and disintegrated. It was a kiln. But you know what was left of that rug? Nothing. It was completely consumed by the fire. There wasn't hardly even any ash. It burned so hot. There was nothing left of it. That is what he's talking about here. She will be consumed by fire. God is going to destroy Babylon to the point where there's nothing left of it. You know, you can go to Babylon today. That's where they built the Tower of Babel, which is why it's named Babylon. Right? It's kind of that centerpiece of divine wrath, because that's where the people were prideful and thought, we're going to build a tower to the heavens and we'll be greater than God. And God said, hey, watch this. And the people scattered. Babylon literally is a barren ruin with wild jackals running through it, just like the Bible says it would be. It is gone. Now there's a city around Babylon, but Babylon itself is an arid wasteland. It's permanent judgment. Then the world responds, right? They look out and they see the fire. It's kind of like we look out here and we see the smoke. I can't see the fire per se, but I know the fire is burning somewhere, right? The world looks out and sees the smoke. They see the Babylon, the prostitute, is on fire. She's been destroyed. How do they respond? Well, let's look at the kings of the earth, right? These are the guys. They were 100% in. They were all in. They were in her bed. They were doing the deed. They were all in. They drank the wine that she gave to them and all the filth that she poured on them. Loved every minute of it. They stand far away and weep and mourn over her. Remember the prodigal son? Oh, he had lots of friends when he was rich. But as soon as the money dried up, where were his friends? He walked home alone. Well, Babylon was adorned by the world, and everyone loved and cherished her. And now they stand far away, and they mourn and weep. They want nothing to do with her now. Is there a contradiction? Why are they crying over her? In chapter 17, it said they hated her. Right? Chapter 17, verse 16, the beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And now they're weeping and mourning over her. They're the ones that helped to bring her to this place in the first place. There's no contradiction. Listen to what they say. Verse 9. When the kings of the earth who committed adultery with her and shared her luxury see the smoke of her burning, they will weep and mourn over her. Terrified at her torment, they will stand far off and cry, woe, woe, O great city, O Babylon, city of power, in 1 hour your doom has come. They mourn the loss of power that she had, and they're terrified. They didn't love her, they loved the power because they lost their security and their backing. Everything was great when there was a bigger dog in the fight, right? Yeah, well, my dad's bigger than your dad. Well, my dog's bigger than your dog, right? It's all fun and games until you got to put skin in the game. Now they realize my big dog just got knocked down. I don't have a dog in the fight anymore. We're in trouble. All their hope, all their security, everything they had invested was in Rome. They'd sold themselves out, and now it was gone. And they mourned the loss of power. Not of the person, right? Not of the prostitute. She was a means to the end, which is why she was a prostitute. But now that's gone, and they don't know what to do. They're terrified. Terrified of each other. We see this a little bit, right? Donald Trump had to go renegotiate some of the facts with NATO. He's like, look, here's where we draw the line. Either you guys get your act together or we're out. You can fight on your own. Suddenly, well, we got all this money in our budget. We could just put that into defense spending like we're supposed to, right? After decades of farting around, Trump says, hey, we're getting ready to leave. You don't get your act together and do your part, we're gone. Now they're all kind of like, well, what would we do? Because our entire defense system is, we got a crazy friend named America. If you punch us, we're going to turn him loose on you. Right? They lost their security. Then the merchants Here in verse 11, the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Cargoes of gold, silver, precious stones and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk, and scarlet cloth, every sort of citron wood, and articles of every kind of ivory, costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cargoes of cinnamon and spice, of incense and myrrh and frankincense, of wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat, and cattle and sheep, horses and carriages, and bodies and souls of men. The merchants are weeping because no one wants to buy their stuff anymore. Rome was a consumer nation. It didn't produce anything. It consumed everything. That should sound kind of familiar. We as America used to be the number one top producers in the world. If you wanted goods, you bought American. Now, everything is Chinese, right? Why? Because we got comfortable. We stopped producing and we started consuming. What did they have? They had the excessive luxuries. The average man on the street was not buying purple, silk, and scarlet cloth. They weren't buying cinnamon and exotic spices. Building materials, food. The citron wood was made for expensive inlay and expensive furniture. Marble pillars in the households and marble furniture. It was all expensive. Bodies and souls of men. They were brought to financial ruin because their goods couldn't be recovered. Listen here in verse 14. They will say, the fruit you longed for is gone from you. All your riches and splendor have vanished, never to be recovered. The merchants who sold these things and gained their wealth from her will stand far off, terrified at her torment. They will weep and mourn and cry out, woe, woe, O great city, dressed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and glittering with stone, gold, and precious stones and pearls. In 1 hour, such great wealth has been brought to ruin. They're not sad about her. They're sad about all their investments and all the stuff they just lost. They're upset because their livelihood has been destroyed. And they stand far off, even though they'd gotten into bed with her, and she was the one that bought all the stuff from them. There was no loyalty. They watched from far off. Well, what a shame. All our stuff is gone. You guys ever have a car accident, even a small one, and you call your insurance company and then they drop you? After you've paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars over the years to be insured, and the first time you get a $500 deductible, they drop you. Right? Kind of the same thing. They don't care about you. They only care about your money and what they can invest in you. And as soon as you become a liability, you're gone. It's not worth the risk. They're not crying because the prostitute who bought all the stuff is gone. They're crying because the stuff that they wanted to sell to someone else is now gone. And who's going to buy all the expensive stuff? They're not mourning Rome. They're just mourning their bottom line. There it is. Capitalism cannot be separated from morality, or it simply becomes greed. I understand why some people were frustrated. And finally, we see the sea commerce. Second half of verse 17. Every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. When they see the smoke of her burning, they will exclaim, was there ever a city like this great city? They will throw dust on their heads and with weeping and mourning and cry out, woe, woe, great city, where all who had ships on the sea became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, saints and apostles and prophets. God has judged her for the way she treated you. All roads lead to Rome, right? You've heard that phrase too. Everyone around the Mediterranean Sea relied on Rome for business. In one way or the other, everything worked around Rome. When we lived in Pennsylvania, there were two classes of workers. Those who worked for Guthrie, the hospital system, and those who worked to support the people who worked at Guthrie in the hospital system. You either worked for the hospital or you were in a support role for the people living in the community so they could work for the hospital. You said the same thing about West Point up here, right? You either work for the mill or you work to support the people who work for the mill. That's all the industry there is, right? Kind of the way Rome worked with their commerce. They stand far off and they weep. Again, they lament their loss of funding. That was a beautiful city. It's a shame. It's going to hurt the tourism, you know. They also acknowledge that it's God's judgment, that there is rejoicing over her destruction. I find that interesting, isn't it? That the sailors, the sea captains, the people who lived around the sea, they're saying, hey, you rejoice, heaven. We know how bad she was to you. We know how awful it was for you. They recognize not everybody's sad about this. Right? You got a dog that bites everybody that walks by, and eventually the dog gets put down. Not everybody's going to be sad the dog died, right? I mean, it's bad. I'm not saying it's not bad, but the dog's biting everybody, and the dog gets put down, he's not biting anybody anymore. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Someone's going to miss it, but not everybody, not the people that got bit. Same is true here. The world knows that it's in the wrong. It just doesn't care until it impacts the bottom line. I think that's why Jesus made such a big deal over stewardship. It's one thing to talk about how much we love Jesus until it hits the wallet, right? Why is it that a pastor can preach one sermon on tithing, and that's the one that everyone complains about? I could preach 15 sermons on people going to hell, and no one bats an eye. I preach one sermon on tithing. That's all he ever talked about. That's all they want up there at that church is money. Why? Because now it hurts personally. Until I can fully submit myself and entrust God